to the IBSS. This one. Is my sound okay? Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to the IBSS Anti-Racism Seminar Series. My name is Kate Montana, and I am a graduate student here in the Arachnology Lab. And I am super excited to introduce our speakers today, who are from my undergraduate lab at UC Berkeley. So it's awesome to have them here. First, we have Dr. Rebecca Tarvin. She is an assistant professor at the Integrative Biology Department at UC Berkeley and an assistant curator of herpetology at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. Her lab studies the evolutionary biology of acquired chemical defenses. Her research is grounded in an appreciation for natural history, especially, but not limited to, frogs. They also work towards structural change in academia through individual and collaborative actions. Also presenting is Valeria Ramírez Castañeda, who is a Ph.D. student in the Integrative Biology Department at UC Berkeley. Her Ph.D. research is about the evolution of toxin resistance in neotropical snakes that feed on poison frogs. She also describes herself as an interdisciplinary biologist with research interests in anticolonial science and increasing diversity in STEM. And today I'm excited because they're going to be talking about a paper that they published along with many other colleagues on equitable fieldwork. And yeah, just officially came out. So the talk is titled "The Fieldwork That We Envision, a Future of Equitable Field Biology and Reciprocity with Local Communities." And just for a short description, conducting fieldwork often involves multiple actors from different contexts and cultures. However, existing power imbalances perpetuate inequities within and among the research team and local communities. Based on experiences and input from a diverse group of global collaborators, we provide suggestions for action-oriented approaches to making field biology more equitable, with particular attention to how those with greater privilege can contribute. Thank you, and give it up for Rebecca and Valeria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. The both of us are going to present, but we are going to switch. So first of all, thank you very much for being here and for inviting us. We are super grateful. Actually, my family is on Zoom, so it's kind of cool that they had the opportunity. Okay, so as Kate said, our presentation is titled "The Fieldwork That We Envision, a Future of Equitable Field Biology and Reciprocity with Local Communities" from Valeria, and Becca is going to come next. What we are going to present first, we are going to show you why we have to rethink fieldwork, how did we start this conversation, where did we find some consensus, and some actions for change. And this paper was, well, these ideas were actually published in a paper recently, and Erin Wisten is not here, but she's another first author. And of course, we are also talking about something that was built in collaborative with these other authors that are here and cannot present at the same time with us. So each person's experience represents a particular journey in biology. So that's why I'm going to tell you that I'm Colombian, and I tend to focus a lot, or think a lot, about the relationship between the global South and the global North. And also, I conduct fieldwork in the Amazon forest, so I also think about inequities inside my own country of origin. And Becca, coming here.
Yes, also to introduce myself. So I grew up on the East Coast of the US, but I've done a lot of fieldwork. I've been working in the Neotropics since about 2008. And I also lived in Ecuador for a time before graduate school. So my approach to this project is trying to think about how people from the global North can be better collaborators.
Okay. So field work in biology from the biology perspective is very important to describe, analyze, and think about biodiversity. Actually, it's not only important for biology research, but also for education and for conservation purposes. So there's a lot of published data about how important are collections and fieldwork. So now, this is a reminder that I have to go to the altimeter and see what you have put. And I'm not logged in, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's see. How can I view results? How can I see the results? Oh, here. Sorry about this. And okay, so it says outdoors, nature, adventure, expedition, exploration, discover. So I love that actually happened something that I wanted to happen, and is the words that we actually relate to fieldwork. So we relate to fieldwork some words that have been related to something that has called the imperial eyes of the world. And actually it's because from a historical perspective, fieldwork has been tied to colonial and capitalist activities that has, that have shaped the modern power asymmetry. So I'm going to show you more in detail how these words relate to the history of colonization. So one example of that is this plant that is quinine. This plant was a medicinal plant in the Amazon and was extracted from there to be used, and it was necessary for the British and the French army to colonize Africa. And this is just one example. There's like thousands of examples. So again, the imperial eyes in fieldwork. So as you can see, this image is some Europeans seeing like this landscape that is empty. It's empty, representing that it's a place to conquer. It's a place that no one lives there. Like there's, so this is the idea of discovery, exploring, expedition. So in fieldwork, we think that, or the idea that we have been built about fieldwork is that humans are invisible. So we go to the forest and there's no human. And actually in the worst case scenario, that was like kind of the past scenario. We saw humans, but they were not represented as humans. Like we didn't thought about them as humans. So just part of nature, like non-humans. But also when local community is represented, is not acknowledged or is not represented as people that is important to build science and to build knowledge. So at the end, this was kind of a little conclusion, like this is why we need to reflect on fieldwork. And next, we're going to think about how we started this conversation.
Okay. So as you may recall, if you were in the US in the summer of 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, there was a lot of civil unrest and protests in the US. At that time, our institution and perhaps also the Cal Academy and many institutions in the US took time and space to reflect on practices in science to see how we can do better justice for all members of our community. And so this led us at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology to form several working groups that had specific goals as it relates to DEI activities. So as a group of field biologists, we thought about fieldwork and how we were doing things and how we were seeing things and what we could do better. So we came together as a group of 8 faculty and students, and we met weekly for about 6 months. And we drafted what we could envision as a set of guidelines for equitable fieldwork. And we spent a lot of time doing this. And I would say, we wanted to, quote unquote, do the work. We did a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and a lot of discussions. And it was not easy. People came with different perspectives, different beliefs. And it was pretty emotional, pretty, a difficult process, really. Once we settled on a general set of guidelines and actions associated with those, we invited colleagues from around the world to provide input on whether or not they agreed with those principles. And we really stressed when we contacted them, we quote unquote did the work, but we want you to tell us, like, does it need to be adjusted? And so we wrote very sincerely requesting, we can make edits at any scale of this document. And so after about 2 years, so this process took quite a long time. And so those our colleagues that we invited represented 14 countries. So these are places where people grew up. You'll notice that we have a specific bias towards people in the US, and that's partly because most of our group at the MBZ is from the US. But when you look at where all of these people have grown up and done their graduate studies or been employed, our group represents 24 countries. And again, many of these people, actually, I think almost everyone has had some time living in the US. So this is a clear bias of our approach that specifically we're talking from the eyes of people who are from the US or have worked in collaboration with the US. So I can say confidently that there are many details that we didn't agree on, but we did find some very, very strong consensus on what the paper is. And that's really about these core principles. So these 4 principles we feel envelop kind of the consensus of our discussion, and they are be collaborative, be respectful, be legal, and be safe. And this work is the result not only of long, extensive conversations and feedback among this group of scientists, but also a fairly comprehensive review of the literature. So we all read, there's quite a lot of papers on these topics now. Right, Valeria?
So this is almost like theater here, changing. Okay, so our consensus. I would highlight before I start that most of them are actions for change. So our actions are super practical things that you can implement. And I think that relates on that we are biologists because people approach these topics in different ways, and we approach that in a practical way. So the first one is be collaborative. And for us, that means broaden your idea of team members. So who is in your team members? And we have started to think about this because of parachute science, that is a non-reciprocal practice where local help is needed, but then is not involved in further things in the research, for example, the intellectual part or in the publication, etc. And this practice is unfortunately still very common. So who is involved in your fieldwork? Is your team representative of the demography of the region? Are the identities historically included from fieldwork in your team? So I just want to see, raise your hand if people do fieldwork here. Okay, like everyone. Cool. So this question is for you too. So how can we increase diversity? I think, well, the first thing is form diverse teams. Like this is super easy to accomplish. But for do that, you can also think about if these diverse identities are having access to training, are having leadership positions, and are included in student committees or any other committees. And something super important, are they being compensated? So one paper, Jensen 2021, showed that a lot of underrepresented students didn't want to fieldwork because of money. So money is important in this sense. Another ideas, communicate among colleagues. So discuss with reciprocity. This is a lot of honesty when you discuss about who will be involved, the authorships, the outcomes, etc. And also think about the sample sharing. So that's something that I have had also in my fieldwork. I conduct fieldwork in Colombia, but I work here. So from the beginning, I had to think about what I'm going to do with my collection. Like, how can I be like also reciprocal with the colleagues in Colombia and not bring all the samples here, for example. So that's something that you may want to think about in your fieldwork too. also provide duplicates from field notes, photos, etc. And rethink the authorship criteria. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's local experts that have helped you a lot in the fieldwork. And if not, well, maybe you are going to encounter in the future field assistants that were very important in fieldwork. So maybe you want to put them also as authors in your papers. And we understand that the community don't always wants to be author in a paper because they don't really think that that's important. So we are going to talk about another ways to compensate. But it's not exclusive. It's not that if you pick one, you cannot pick the other one. You can do both. And finally, translate your work to the local language. So this is very important to facilitate outreach inside the local communities and to facilitate political decisions, environmental decisions in the place where you work. So if they don't speak English, traduce your paper, translate. Another principle is be respectful. And this, again, is idea of breaking the idea that nature and humanity are split, and actually think that the forests that we work on and that we know are thanks to interactions with humans. So these forests exist because humans were there, especially with ethnic communities. Are there, sorry. So please honor the local sovereignty before, during, and after communities have the last word. Sorry, so they are always the most important people to ask what you're doing. So try to talk to them about your work. Of course, we acknowledge that conflict is possible because fieldwork is conducted in territories that are still suffering from the imposition of extractivism, poverty, and biopiracy. And because conflict happens, we put also some ideas on how to maybe decrease conflict or the possibility of a conflict. Some ideas are familiarize yourself with the local history and with the people that you are working with. And also familiarize yourself with your own history because that reflects your own bias. So that's important. Also incorporate local knowledge when publishing, of course, with permission, but acknowledge that the organisms were there before science described the organisms. So talk to the people and also like highlight this knowledge. And some methodologies that you can use to talk about all these things is informed consent that is used in a lot of other disciplines. So is when you meet with the local community and talk about the impact of the research, the source of funding, the methods, the accessibility of the data, and who is going to benefit from the project. So of course, we think that the community should benefit from the project too. And we have also some ideas to show you how you could benefit the community or think about how to give back to the community. So some ideas are giving educational opportunities, doing collaborative science. I know that this sounds like repetitive, but we wanted to highlight that there's scientists that are local. Like, it's not only because it sounds like, in the case of Colombia, for example, Colombia is very big and there's scientists in Colombia, but I work in the Amazon. So let's try to find also the scientists that are from the Amazon and are living there where you are conducting fieldwork. Or maybe not scientists, but also experts because they have been living there forever. Think about payment, hire local workers. That's very important. Broadcast local issues and achievements. Again, most of the forests that we know are resisting, and these people are resisting to get the forest there standing. So share these problems, share what's happening there. And lastly, and this is my favorite, is let's try to conduct more grassroots science. This is community-led science. This means that the community thinks about the goals, thinks about what they want to answer, or the problems that we have. And we as biologists, we help them to provide tools. to answer this question. So I hope that we can do more of that in the future. So now we're going to do an activity. So take 1 minute to think about who you are, acknowledge your own privilege and possible biases, and also who are the people that you work with in the field. Do you know their history? So take 1 minute. I'm not counting the minutes. Let me know if you think that 1 minute that you're good. Okay, put up. Okay, cool. So now discuss with your partner we put 3 minutes, but if we need a little bit more, I think that's okay. So also in the Zoom, if you could split them in breakout rooms and discuss how do you interact with the local community or with the local collaborators? Is there any action information that could inform you better on how to interact with them? So pick up partner. Okay, we are ready. Also, some people in Zoom are ready. So we are going to take one person here that wants to share the discussion and one person in the Zoom. So please raise your hand if you want to share your discussion. It's voluntary. Like there's no right answers. Like you cannot be wrong here. It's impossible.
Hi. So we were discussing our partnerships with people that we work with in the field, and I feel like we're pretty strategic at the outset. We're trying to work directly with our partners, and a lot of the things that you presented have looked really familiar. There are certain things that didn't look familiar that made me think, such as compensation, for instance. That's something that, there are compensations, and we were talking about compensation is not always monetary, but if you're talking monetary compensation, sometimes there's opportunities we've brought people back to the academy for future training. We've even people have done graduate degrees here, but actually we pay their expenses, but actually paying them a salary is something interesting to think about as well.
Thank you very much. Someone from Zoom wants to share. I think we can put the audio. Oh, you're going to read it.
I think we're still waiting on someone from Zoom. So if anyone else from the room, Jacob?
Some thoughts that we were talking about was just like an example that I've had personal experience with the Islands Initiative here is while the part of the team was in St. Martin, there was like a convening with a bunch of both local business owners as well as nature organization and other just like community members who are active in the nature space, like having like a concerted like discussion with goals and objectives of like what they both personally and from whatever organization they were like representing would like to see for the future of like biodiversity specifically on St. Martin. And what I liked about that is even if it's not the same nature of partnership, I think that a lot of these same like relationships can be gleaned in different areas, even in California, where you might not necessarily think of building those same relationships because you're like, oh, I'm in the United States, but I think that there's still like a lot of ways that you can build that too.
Thank you very much. Do we have someone from Zoom? Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to close before Becca continues. That is very interesting that everyone has very, very, very different experiences in the field. And we cannot, like part of the paper states super clearly that we cannot like say that everyone can do everything, but maybe taking some ideas from that and just reflecting if it's possible and or why it's not possible. So thank you for sharing your experiences.
Okay. All right. Our third principle is be legal. And as you might be aware, the rules help enforce equitable science. For a long time, there were no rules, and you could go collect freely and bring things back to other countries. But we know now, the rules exist. They help us monitor biodiversity by keeping track of how many animals are collected and where they go. And actually, these rules help level existing power imbalances. And moreover, they help foster a sense of trust between science and society if people know that you're following permits and rules. As part of the paper, we would love to be able to give you a sheet that describes all of the permits that your specific research program needs to follow. But as you might be well aware, these sorts of rules and regulations vary by country and by research field. even by the type of animal you work with or the place. And so what we did instead, because most of us are expertise is in vertebrates, we wrote actually a fairly comprehensive guide to collecting vertebrates in the US or in collaboration with the US. So dealing with collection permits in the US and also transport of animals into and out of the US. And so this is just an example of how complex these sorts of things can get. And so I would encourage you to think about creating, for students, for example, something like this is extremely useful. It's often very hard to get a handle of what the permit landscape looks like. So we recognize that the system of rules and regulations is far from perfect. For example, legality does not translate in justice. It often ignores local sovereignty rules as well. And actually, we have a whole set of open questions associated with this, with the paper, one of which is focused on this issue, which you might be familiar with, is how can we ensure fairness through rules and regulations without greatly increasing time and resources spent on bureaucracy? So I'll let you think about that one. If you have the answer, tell me, please. Okay, and our fourth principle is to be safe. And actually, being safe is equivalent to being equitable, because we know that risks in the field are not evenly distributed. For example, women and minorities face especially high levels of sexual assault and harassment in the field. This is documented in the literature. We know that fieldwork can be especially dangerous for groups targeted by discrimination. I had colleagues who wanted us to put in the paper, if you're Black in the US, you might get the police called on you, right? So those are clear issues. And we know also that the physical and mental challenges of fieldwork are not experienced equally by team members, right? Especially for new students, and it can dissuade them from doing biology at all at a later time point. So I ask us to broaden the meaning of safety. Think about mental and emotional emergencies as medical emergencies. And think about safety as it encompasses not only your team, but that of local communities and the surrounding ecosystem. And part of what's inherent to our entire paper is the idea that proactive planning is necessary for us to do more equitable work. And so when it comes to safety, one thing that you can do is to create a field safety plan that's unique to your field program or field site. And we provide a 15-page extensive document that you can, delete or add sections where it makes sense for you. And we provide examples of how you might do that. And there's an editable Word version posted online. So we encourage you to think about doing something like that. We also encourage you not only to make a field plan, but to do it in collaboration with your field team. Think about the risks that are inherent to your specific field team and the place that you work. And then also seek out training. So do first aid, wilderness first aid, or conflict management, or bias training. Those things can be helpful. Okay, so this is our last activity. So I would like you to, in pairs, select one of these two scenarios and discuss them for a couple of minutes, and then hopefully you'll find a solution and you can share it with the group. I'm just kidding. Of course, I don't expect any solutions for either of these. But yeah, and I will try to copy the text for Zoom. Go for it. So would anyone like to share something from their discussion? Anyone like to share something they talked about or potential solutions?
We discussed a little bit, number one, with funding and how to help local communities, maybe education and outreach, or engaging more community science in those regions, like people that I know in the Philippines that are working on doing like local butterfly surveys and encouraging at least more community awareness of their own biodiversity, which hopefully potentially leads to more local investment and also like exterior collaboration.
I love that idea. Yeah, so more grassroots science. Yeah, that's something we actually talked a bit about in our discussion group about some places don't have collections, for example, but also if there are no collection, like how would you ever get funding for something like that from the local government? That's a big challenge. Anyone else want to share?
Well, I don't actually want to share, but I would like this guy right here to share. Because he has real discrete answers to this question that you just heard yesterday.
Go for it. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Thank you, Lauren. What if we? What do you want me to talk about? But this is Fieldwork. So how?
It's related.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how many minutes do I have to talk about how big of a problem? I think we can also mention about the second point, which is a little bit more accessible, although it also depends. It's a personal situation, so how widespread it is, and I think we discussed that you have to be transparent about the agreement before we start. So let's say you have to be flexible sometimes and having this clear communications between the different parties. The other point too, I'm trying to remember, is drum roll. About someone that you can trust. So if you have the field coordinator and the field assistant, who should they complain to? And they may, let's say, complain to Shannon, but then the field assistant actually had to trust Shannon.
Yeah.
And in certain situations, let's say in my country, if someone is going there and take a field assistant, they might not trust their professors. So like, I'm gonna complain about that. So
these are really insightful comments.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think if we can, I would love to chat for hours about this. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to contribute to the discussion?
But I actually have one, and I'm just going to advertise
please.
what we're doing, for instance, in our center, is now we have an agreement with the PI. So every foreigner who's going to do field work or take research assistance, there's a long list of things that they will abide for. And for instance, they also communicate with me. So now I'm defending the students and some sort of like how they're going to do. So at least
that is so
we're
cool.
trying to do, and surprisingly, actually, I don't know, never give me the mic. That's the problem. So I'm just going to give you a story that is very encouraging. We have some researchers that are coming to Madagascar to do some field work on ants, and we put all the conditions and say like, okay, that's fine. And then we had 2 good students. We're doing like tough selections. And then I asked them, like, do you think it's possible to actually take 2 students instead of 1? The law is that you have to take at least 1 student. And we have been negotiating and I couldn't find the fund. But the researchers say like, okay, this is so great, I'm going to pay out of my pocket.
Wow.
So I know we have stories sometimes about how bad things are, but this might not be part of the talk, but there are also a lot of good people out there that are trying to something. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really lovely. Ideally, someone wouldn't have to pay out of pocket to support science, but that's very generous.
Thank you all in the room. We do have one from Lindsay in the chat. and Lindsay was saying for funding, in St. Martin, we have contracted with a local organization to expand environmental learning. As part of that process, we have been financially supporting and capacity building for them to advocate for and seek out their own funding. They tell us we are helping to legitimize their work in the eyes of others.
That's pretty cool.
Thank
Wow.
you, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I hope some of you are going to Ento beers, so I'd like to hear more. Okay, but for the sake of time, I have to move on. So I want to let you know that we have some, like full-size poster type things you can print, and we brought some for the people that are here in person. We also have a full translation of the article in Spanish, thanks to Valeria. Thank you. And if you are interested in translating, we would be happy to post it in any language. It's open. It's a Creative Commons license, and we would love to have more languages for the document. And if you find yourself asking, well, what's the evidence that there are problems should be addressed? We also provide a list of almost 60 papers that include both personal experiences from people, but also social science research books and different articles that have come out both recently and in the last couple decades. I've put in bold here a couple of the ones that really stood out to me. I would especially pitch the Neotropical ornithology paper. It's still a preprint, but it really impacted how I was thinking about these things, even after doing this entire discussion group. So that's a paper you should read. Everyone should read. But there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of things to draw on. And I would just like to add, aside from these principles, I have kind of two main takeaways from this experience. One is this mantra to ask rather than assume. It's easy to assume you know what people want and need, but it's really important not to do that and to ask. And this is something I'm trying to apply in a lot of aspects of my life. And the other is to do the work, so read the papers, and then I found it to be especially productive and difficult, but exciting, and to work in a team that had a bunch of different perspectives, who had very strong opinions. But when you have a common goal, it forces you to have those difficult discussions. And I think we all grew, and it was a really good experience for everyone.
Okay, I'm going to close with also the future. So I put it one quote from, it's kind of a combined quote from two indigenous leaders. And one says, we defend forests, trees, mountains, and rivers, its fish, game, spirits, and human inhabitants. Existing has been imposed, so coexisting needs to be coordinated in some way. So I really like this idea of coexisting. For me, I hope that we can conduct more multicultural and interdisciplinary biology in the future. So coexisting with others' knowledge. And also another quote from someone that I hope you know, because it's from the Bay Area, and it's Ursula Le Guin. She's a writer. She was a writer, super famous. I actually really encourage you to read the books if you don't know her. And she says, utopia is a process. It is reflection and adjustment, learning and growth. So I would say for a long time, these ideas of biology and how we can do science was kind of a utopia, and now it's kind of happening. So I hope that, and also we put open questions. So there's a lot of things to still do. And I hope that we can also conduct a lot of research of in DEI in biology in the future. And to close, of course, acknowledgements to the other first author, Erin Wisten again, to the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. Of course, we started the team with inside the museum. So for the Ramatouche, I'm sorry if I pronounce it weirdly, Ohlone community, that's the territory where we are in now. Friends and family who read and commented the manuscript. Camila Pacheco, who did the illustrations, previous and ongoing work to make scientific practices diverse and equitable. Thank you for all of you doing that. I know that a lot of people here are doing that too. And of course, but most important, to all of the field assistants, field people, just families in the field, even the dogs that have been working with me in the field too. I have learned so much from them, and we have all learned so much from them. And this is actually a paper that was born because of them. So thank you so much. And we are happy to take questions if we have time. I'm going to.
Thank you for sharing that wonderful talk. And not only was it a talk, it was just such great suggestions for how we can conduct ourselves now and moving forward. So I really appreciated all of it. I really liked how you were talking about collaboration and that you do that in the before, during, and after phases of the field work that you're conducting. And my question about collaboration is, at what point do you begin that? At what point do you start to identify your collaborators, reach out to them? Are you working with them to co-design your projects? Or is the collaboration something that's happening after you've designed a project and then you're seeking collaborators? Just curious about your approach there. And I imagine it might be different as you're working in different places.
One thing that came up consistently in our discussions with feedback from our collaborators was something that we don't always do, speaking as a scientist from the global north, is ask what the research questions are of our collaborators and how we can support their research program. And I think that is something to keep in mind through the whole process. So I am in favor of contacting someone early before you have like a prescribed research plan, and to try to design your project in true collaboration, instead of having your grant written and then knowing you need someone in a specific place or country. And that's a big ask, I know, but I think in an ideal situation, that's what I would recommend. I don't know if Valeria, you had other thoughts about that. Okay.
Yeah, I could say just that actually we are also learning about this. And the meanwhile, we are not doing everything exactly as we put it. It's something that we envision that we can do better also in the future. In my experience, for example, in the Amazon, I started with an idea and I went there with an idea, but it has been transformed also by the scientists there, which is super cool. But I didn't start it in a collaborative way from the beginning. That's the truth. But well, I hope that in the future we can do it differently.
Yeah, I had a question. So I know from your sample, you had people who, most of them had worked in the US at some point. Were there things that seemed consistent across all the different countries they were working in? Are we doing particular things well and some things much worse? I guess I'm just kind of wondering like what the dynamics are in other countries for field research.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and something that we were careful about framing in our paper, that we have this clear bias towards like a view from the US and towards the US. And so something that we taught, so a lot of like the bulk of the collaborators are actually based in Indonesia. And Indonesia is a very complex place culturally and geographically. And something that we heard from them and also from collaborators in the Philippines is, and actually from places in South America as well, is a lot of the ideas that we discuss in the paper apply also domestically. And everyone kind of talked about this view, often cities tend to have like stronger, quote unquote, research programs, and people from cities go to smaller places to do field work. And that also creates this sort of power dynamic domestically. And that was something a lot of people had said they'd had experience with, in the US, but also in all of these other countries. So that was kind of interesting. And I know people in the US have also experienced that. Yeah, and I also want to say, we certainly don't mean to be prescriptive with our recommendations. We understand that fieldwork is complex, and I don't want to be, telling you how to run things. We can only provide these group collaborative ideas that you can consider.
So we're just about out of time. So let's give another thank you to Becca and Valeria for being here. And if you have more questions, I believe they will both be at IBSS Cheers and To Beers. So please feel free, if you're on site, to give them their questions or reach out, and I'm sure we can pass along contact info too. So thank you again.